So now we're on Daf Tezvav Beis. Hasam, the Gemara says, Haroeh Omer Lafushi Maya Hudikovid. Again, there's no Nirikish State Toros, because the onlooker will suspect that they wanted to widen the shokes, that it would collect more water. A radically large, volume of water. They use that water for many other things, and so forth and so on. So it's not Nirikish Day Taurus. There's no lotus called Toshmadi over Rabbi Lozer Tzark Shayisi Lomi Toritz Rabbi Yochanan Charani Ra'isi Shaya Ochel Pascha Revu B'Melach B'Shnei Batzores Pasi Vodati Es Abba Amar Li Holech Lo Zaysin. So Rabbi Lozer Bar Tzadok testifies about his father Tzadok, that when his father got wind of the fact that Rabbi Yochanan Charani was so poor that he was eating a dry bread during this year of drought, and Tzadok instructed his son Rabbi Lazar to bring Zaysim to Rabbi Yochanan. Holachti lo, I brought him Zaysim, but Rabbi Yochanan, but he saw Rabbi Yochanan, and he wasn't eating them. Why? Because Rabbi Yochanan realized, oh son, Zaysim Shem Lachin. Now, once there's lachus on the Zaysim, let's say there's oil. Oil is one of the 7 mashkim hamachshirim. So he felt that there was a hechshel kabel tuma, and that perhaps the Zaysim had been mekabel tuma. Therefore, he didn't want to eat from the Zaysim. Amali einani yochel Zaysim. Now, to give a little bit of a background to this Gemara that we're learning now, there's Machlokas Shin Beis Hillel Beit Shammai about Mohel Hayotzim and Azaysim. In other words, even before they actually pressed the olives, there was a certain amount of Mohel, which is kind of an oily substance, a liquidy substance that would surface on the olive. Hayotzim and Azaysim. And here we have a sheet of Beit Shammai, Eino Machshir, that Mohel which comes out of the Zaysim without Dricha, that's not Shemen. And it's not one of the Sheva Mashkid, and therefore there's no Hechshel Kabel to Beis Hillel Omrim that he's a Machshir. In other words, Beis Hillel gave a certain Chashivus to these Zaysim, to the Mohel that came from the Zaysim, and the Zaysim were in a Chavish Shel Cheres, and Rabbi Yochanan Chachurni was afraid that maybe an Amoritz came in contact with it on the gav, the outside back of the chavis, and was mitame, that which is inside, meaning the zaysim inside. So if an Amoritz would come in contact with the outside of the chavis now is mitame the zaysim. And where's the hechshel kabel tuma? The answer is because Moel, according to Beis Hillel, is Shemen. It's one of the 7 mashkim. Now Rabbi Loza continues to tell us about the story. Basi vodati es Abba. I came back and I told Abba, meaning Tzadok, what went on over here and why Rabbi Yochanan refused to drink to eat the olives. So father said to me, Amali, lechem orlo. Rabbi Yochanan is missing a piece of information about the Mitzias, about the scenario. Chavis, this barrel of olives, nekuva hoisa, it was perforated in the bottom. Elishe stamuha hashmorim, when the sediments fell down to the bottom of the chavis, they closed the holes on the bottom of the chavis. But the original intention, when they made the holes in the bottom of the chavis, was a gili dastlo nichole sheyipol amoel azaysim. They were trying to avoid a situation in which the moel would fall onto the zaysim, which means that a mashke, is only a machshir if it's dirtsono. That's kiyitain dimyu to kiyutain. He's got to have das. But here, he had indicated just the opposite, that he punctured holes in the bottom of the chavis. He didn't want the moel to reach up to the Zaysim. Utnan. And we have a mission in Edios Perek Dalet. Chavit shel Zaysim migulgalim. If they're dachuk, they're standing in the chavis because one is pushed against the other. Beit Shammai omrim ein tzrichim lenage. You don't have to clean out the chavis and wipe it off. And that's even though it's not a perforated chavis, because the moel that's yotzim and azaysim is not machshel kabel tumah. Because moel is considered like mei peros. It's not considered like shem. Beis Hillel omrim tzrichim lenage. According to Beis Hillel, if he wants to avoid a situation where there'll be a hechsher on the zaysim, a hechsher kabel tumah, then he's got to wipe it off. Without wiping it off, then the zaysim will be muchsharim l'kabel tumah by the moel, because moel has a din of shemen and not a din of meiperos. That's where Beis Hillel rejects Beit Shammai. Umodim, but Beis Hillel concede that in nikva, if he deliberately perforated, he drilled holes in the bottom of the chavis, vistamuha, and afterwards the shmarim settled to the bottom and clogged up these holes. So the moel now is sort of back. It's filling up inside the chavis and wetting the zaysim. Shehi tahora. Why? Because once he was megaladas with an akiva of the chavis, that it's lo nichale, he's not in any way interested in the moel falling on the zaysim. It's therefore they would not be machsherit for kabbalas too. And now Rabbi Elazar finishes up by saying v'afal pi shetalmid Shammai hoya, even though Rabbi Yochanan Achurdi was a talmid of Beit Shammai, and according to Beit Shammai, even without nikivas hachavis, the moel is not considered anything more than meiperos. It's not machsherit the zaysim. Nevertheless, he was choshesh for the shita of Beis Hillel. He would not eat the zaysim until he knew for sure that nikva hachavis. And kol masav lo asa elikid divrei Beis Hillel. So we see very clearly that he wanted to make sure that he would do the halacha implemented according to the ruling of Beis Hillel, and that's tzarich l'nagev. The Gemara says the following: if you're going to say the Beis Hillel continued, despite the machlokas against Beis Hillel, in implementing their halachas, hainu rebutzek. Now we have a chiddush that the Bryce is telling me about Rabbi Yochanan Achurdi, that even though he was a talmid of Shammai, nevertheless he was noeg kol ma'asav k'Beis Hillel. Elai armet lo asu my rabusa. If Beit Shammai, according to your opinion, was Mavatal Taito Kedas Beis Hillel, and he never implemented his psak, then what's the finish of Rabbi Yochanan Nuri that he did like Beis Hillel? I mean, even Beit Shammai agrees to Beis Hillel. So that seems to be a final proof, a conclusive evidence that Beit Shammai asu kidivrei. Toshma, another proof that Beit Shammai asu kidivrei. Shalu es Rabbi Yoshua, Soras Abbas Mahu. What's the status of Tzoras Abbas? Does she need chalitza? Amalei machlokus Beit Shammai Beis Hillel. Not only does she need chalitza, but according to Beit Shammai, she needs yibum. Halacha k'divrei mi. Who do we pass like? Hamalehem ibnei ma temach nisam es roshim and shnei harm gedolim. I'm putting my head in between two great mountains. Who am I to tell you whether we pass like Beis Hillel or Beit Shammai? Bein shtei machlokas gedolos. Bein Beit Shammai Beis Hillel. And now you want to ask me to be machriya b'zeh, to put my head between the two mountains? And not only that, if I'll paskin halacha like Beit Shammai, Shemi Yorotzu, Kul Golti, maybe they'll have my head, meaning if there'll be mishpachos from these tzaros, and the halacha is really, according to Beit Shammai, that she needed chalitza, And now these children became psulim because I'm going to be Mora Halacha like Beit Shammai. אבל אני מעיד לכם על שתי משפחות גדולות שהיו בירושלים, משפחת בית צפונים ובית החלמי, ומשפחת בית קופוי, מבן מקושש, שהם בני צרוס, ומהם יצאו כהנים גדולים ושמשו על גבי מזבח. So I can testify, says Rabbi Yeshua, about these families, that they were bnei tsaros, meaning they came from a relationship between the Yavam and the Tsaras Erva, and they were married off like Beis Hillel without chalitza. And Kohen Gedolim came from those marriages. So let's see what the Gemara wants to prove from this brisa. If they were miyabim, Keshitas Beit Shammai, because Asu Kidivreim, then I understand why those who were born from the Tsaros, who would be Mamzerim according to Beis Hillel, and therefore Rabbi Yeshua is afraid that if he paskins Halach Beis Hillel, they'll kill him because there's an absolute psul of Mamzerus as a result of the marriage between the Yavam and the Yevamot, who's a Tzaras Erva. Eli Amrit Shalo Asu, if you're going to assume that Beit Shammai would mevatel their das and they would not permit Yibum, is Amaika Omar Misyariani. What's he afraid of? He's inhibited to paskin halacha k'Beis Hillel. So the Gemara says, "Unehi nami di asu." I don't understand misyariani, even if you hold asu. Ha'amar Rav Yeshua ein mamzer ella michayve mises bezdin. Now, according to Beit Shammai, the status of the Tzaras Erva is that she falls for Yibum. According to Beis Hillel, she is an Erva. Tzaras Erva is an Erva. But it's only an Erva of Chayv Kritz. So therefore, what would be the fear if we paskin like Beis Hillel? The Noladim will not be Mamzerim, even according to Beit Shammai, because it's only Chayv Kritzis. And we hold, that's Rabbi Yeshua Shita, that there's no Mamzeris generated unless it's Chayv Mises Bezdin. So Gemara answers, Nehi nami de mamzer lo havi, even if I agree with you that according to Rabbi Yeshua's logic, the Ben Tzara would not be a mamzer, but pogum mio havi. As far as kahuna, the child would be excluded from kahuna. He's mischal lekuna mikal v'chomer almana. The Torah says about almana, if she marries a kohen gadol, lo yechalel zaro biyama. So we see that violating the Isur of almana l'kohen gadol incurs chilul kahuna, psul or pagum kahuna. And ma'al almana she'en Isur noeg bakol. This is an Isur that's specifically limited and restricted to the kohen gadol. And nevertheless, B'na Pagu, the child of this relationship between Almana and a Kohen Gadol, is Pagum L'Kuhuna. So in the case of an Erev of Isur Kare, She'isur Shava Bakol, it's not just an Isur on one person, it's for everybody. They all share those Isur Arayas. Is Yisrael Kekohanim, it doesn't matter how much more so that the child would be certainly Hagum Bekahuna because it's a more severe violation. So therefore he was afraid to pass like Beis Hillel because if he would do so, then there'll be a problem in the Bnei Atzaros Shes Yabnu Ki Beit Shammai. And even though it's not a chiyuv misa but a chiyuv kares, but nevertheless, it certainly is a pagum kuhuna, psul kuhuna. So the Gemara asks, Kabo minei v'kapashetle. They asked Rabbi Yeshua, what's the din of tzaros? And kapashetle b'nei tzaros. They were asking, what's the status of Itzaris Erva as far as Yibam and Chalitza is concerned? That was the question that was posed to Rabbi Yeshua. And Kapashat B'nei Tzaros, and he gives an answer with regard to the B'nei Tzaros that were Nisu L'Shuk below Chalitza. And the truth is that even according to Beit Shammai, the B'nei Tzaros Shenisu L'Shuk are still ksherim because we're dealing with the Isa Lotia and Eish Lamesh Chutz Nisar. It's only a law. And the Gemara says, Tarti Kaboy Mine. They asked two questions to Rabbi Yeshua. First, they asked him Tzaros Mai. What's the name of Tzaros Erva as far as Yibam and Chalitza? And Viod, and furthermore, Imtin Salomar, if you're going to pass him like Beis Hillel, Soros Kibeis Hillel. And therefore the Tzaros Erva could get married to the Chuk without Chalitza. We could still have a suffix B'nei Tzaros, Beis Hillel, Libeit Shammai Mam. The children of these Tzaros, born to a man min ashuk without chalitza, what would they be? What would be the status of B'nei Tzaros according to Beit Shammai, as far as kahuna is concerned? Because Beit Shammai holds that these Tzaros need chalitza, and in the absence of chalitza, is a violation of lotia ish lamesh chutza. Would the vlad hanolad be considered a chalal l'kahuna? So the Gemara asks, "L'maynaf kemina." What din comes out of this suffix in the view of Beis Shammai? Halacha is kibeis Hillel. So, what's the nafkamina here? And the Gemara answers that even though this suffix has no nafkamina halacha, as far as the B'nei Tzaros themselves is concerned, but lemifshat vlad machse gushasa lebeis Hillel, we can be poshed a suffix regarding the din and the status of a vlad machse gushasa, meaning he remarried his divorcee wife after she married someone else, and they had a child. Let's say they gave birth to a daughter. Is she psul lakuna or not? And this suffix is according to everyone, because even lebeis Hillel, if a man divorces his wife and she marries someone else, she's asur alav. He's not allowed to remarry his ex-wife if she was already married to someone else. And if he violated this law and he remarried his wife and they had a daughter, the suffix is, what's the status of the daughter? Can she marry a Kohen or not? What are the two stadim of the suffix? Should we say, like the suffix in Shitas Beit Shammai that denotes Tzaros, Shenisu L'Shuk Below Chalitza, and Shnei B'Chayov Mlavin, Af she'ein lanu makar mafurish b'Torah leposam lakuna mikom kom yesh listapek mehem, based on the Kal V'chomer that we saw from Amod L'Kohen Gadol, mi amrin, do we accept the Kal V'chomer and passel them, Uma Amod L'Kohen Gadol, she'ein isura shava bakol, and nevertheless, b'na pogum l'kahuna, is grusha mugzeres zu she'isura shava bakol and din she b'na pogum. So one side in the suffix is that we can have a kal v'chomer from Amod L'Kohen Gadol, which is any isura shava bakol, and here machzir gruchaso liachar shenises it's shava bakol. So certainly it would be a pagam and a psul of kuna. Oh, Dilmo should say no. Ikal mifrach is a pirchan the kal v'chomer mali almana shehi atzma mischaleles. No, it's after this almana has bia with the Kohen Gadol. Through that bia, she becomes a halal. And that would mean that after the Kohen Gadol died, she couldn't even marry the Kohen Hedge, because The rule is that kol isha shenivala b'bias isure kahuna nases chalola v'neseres lekahuna. So if she's a bas kohen and she eats truma b'beis avia, she now is asura b'achilas truma. Therefore, just like she herself is meschaleles lekahuna, so too her children are meschal lekahuna. And that's not true in the case of a grusha shetzira. And in the case of tzaras erva shenises l'shuk, ein atzma nifsolas lekahuna. The bias isur lav would not passel they themselves to kahuna, because we're not dealing with isure kahuna. Neither in the case of machzir grushaso or in the case of shara rights. The Omer Lahu on the top of Tesvav Beis, on the bottom of Tesvav Beis, Omer Lahu, Rabbi Yeshua said to them, "What's your question about Saros Erva? Are they mutter b'yibum or not? Misyari ani, I'm inhibited about answering this question. Who answer it because perhaps Yakumu alai b'nei osan Saros mi base Shammai shesyavmu me'achashem nifsolim lekuna al pi horazu." But on Daf Tezayin b'nei Saros of Beis Hillel that were married off to the shuk without chalitza in the Tzar service situation is ani modalachem, that even Beit Shammai would agree that they ksherim lekuna, because the mishpachos of these tzaros became ultimately kohanim gedolim, sman lios kohanim gedolim, and Beit Shammai agreed to the minui for kohen gadol of these tzaras erva shenisu l'shuk below chalitza. Uminuyam nasa gamal das Beis Shammai. Hare lanu ki ein leposla mikal v'chor me'amona l'kohen gadol mishum ha'pircha amur liel, because we have a pircha because of Yisuri Kahuna, and therefore nifshat af vlad machzir gushaso eino pogum lekahuna, because it's not an Isur Kahuna per se. Toshma b'mei Rabbi Dosa ben Hyrcanus hutra tzaras abasli achim. They were matir, the brother of Rabbi Dosa, who was a Talmud of Beis Shammai, and the tzibur is noeg al piv, and they all followed the ruling of Beis Shammai. Shma mina also. We see that Beis Shammai actually implemented their rulings. Shma mina, and that is the maskon of the Gemara. The Gemara completely rejects and refutes the Man Yomer who says lo asu Beis Shammai kidiv. So here's where we're going to stop. And in Masechet tomorrow, we'll start with Gufa here on line 3 on Daf Zayin.